right. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. My name is Andrew Hutchinson. I'm the Adult Services Librarian over at the Ignacio Community Library. And I'm joined by Trisha, who is at Southwest La Plata Library. Trisha, if you want to wave for the people who can see you. So we've been putting this together with both Pine River Library and Durango Library. During COVID, our libraries have banded together to try to offer as much programming as we can during this time. And we have been lucky enough to get Nicole Clark from the La Plata County Extension Office to come over and give us some great opportunities for programming. So thank you, Nicole. Like I said, one more time, just during the presentation, if everyone can stay muted, just makes everything easier for us. And there'll be multiple opportunities if you have a question to ask it out loud, or feel free to type it into the chat. Trisha is going to be monitoring the chat for us and will let us know if there are any questions. And without further ado, Nicole, you can take it away.
All right. Hi. Yep. So my name is Nicole Clark. I'm a registered dietitian, and I'm also the Family and Consumer Science Agent for La Plata County Extension. And thank you for being here for the presentation, Chocolate, Good for the Heart and Soul. As you know, Valentine's Day is this week, so it's a perfect time of the year to talk about chocolate, being such a big chocolate holiday as it is. But it also happens to be that February is American Heart Month. So there's, a lot of things I'm sure you've heard of that are good for heart health, everything from exercise to healthy diet, even whatever tools you have in your box to help with stress reduction. Certainly those are all applicable. But another one that you've maybe heard rumors about is that chocolate can be good for your heart. So what you can expect today is that we're going to really dive into that latter rumor and find out from the science whether or not chocolate really is good for your heart. And my hope is that your takeaway will be some good convincing talking points to throw out at your friends, neighbors, and family so that you can justify your own chocolate habit. And by your, I guess I have to include myself. I selfishly admit that part of this presentation was having those good talking points so that I could explain why I needed just a little bit of chocolate after lunch almost every day. So that's what you can expect for about the first 20 minutes or so. Is we'll do more of that educational component, and then we'll dive into the demonstration of showing how to make a dark chocolate bark. So one thing, and kind of as Andrew has already suggested, that I want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask questions. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's a learning opportunity. What I might suggest is that you throw your questions in the chat box or just jot them down. And after we do the educational component, then we will we'll pause, we'll review any of those questions, and then we can do the demonstration. So that's what I'm going to suggest, but if you've got a very pressing question and you want to ask it right away, then please do so. We're certainly welcome to do that. Okay, before we dive into anything, I want to get a feel for what you already know about chocolate, and it's really more about some of those fun facts. So Andrew, if you could, please launch our poll. What do you know about chocolate? And folks, what you can expect is on your screen, you should see a box show up. There will be 4 questions. And when you see that, just answer them. Each question will have a single answer. And from that, you can scroll on the box so that you can access all 4 questions. It should only take a minute or so. All right, Andrew, go ahead.
All right, it's launched and people are voting.
All right, Andrew, I'm going to rely on you to tell me when it looks like everybody's had a chance to respond.
You're almost there.
computer audio.
And maybe we'll just take another 30 seconds or so. It's possible that not everybody is choosing to respond, and that's perfectly fine.
Right. It actually just wrapped up. So
Okay.
we had
Great.
seven votes.
So you should be able to share the results so that everybody can see the questions. If not, I'll just reiterate them. That works too.
All right, I just shared.
Great. Okay, so the first question, why is chocolate called food of the gods? And maybe first and foremost, is that new to you? Have you ever heard chocolate called food of the gods? Well, if you guessed or already knew that chocolate was called food of the gods because it's actually reflective of the Latin name Theobroma, which is a Mayan word. So that hopefully you got that one right. If not, no consequences. Next question, which chocolate is the most popular in the United States? White, dark, or milk? Hopefully you guessed milk. It's a little bit telling about the American palate, the preference, because it tends to be a little bit sweeter. Okay, next question. Can chocolate harm a dog? And the answer is true. Unfortunately, one of the compounds in chocolate is called theobromine, which is a central nervous stimulant. And dogs just don't have the capacity to metabolize it very quickly. So in essence, it builds up and that becomes problematic. So when you go about making your dark chocolate bark, make sure that you store it in a place where your furry friends won't get it, because we certainly don't want that to be an outcome. Last but not least, can chocolate be good for heart health? Well, I know you're hoping the answer is yes, and the truth is yes. Dark chocolate can be good for heart health, but stay tuned because there's some details you need to know in order to make that really a true statement. All right, so you can go ahead and close the poll now, Andrew. As we go about exploring whether or not chocolate is healthy, one of the first things we have to look at is to really understand what are the base ingredients of chocolate. So let's have a look here. And can I just confirm, can you see this plate all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in essence, all chocolate is made from 3 base ingredients. We have sugar, we also have cocoa butter, and we have cocoa powder. Now it probably goes without saying, and I'm guessing you've heard this somewhere along the line. Sugar, yes, it tastes delicious, but it's not one of the best things for our health. So we'll just kind of set that aside, knowing this is not the healthiest ingredient in chocolate. The next one to discuss is cocoa butter. So actually, just real quickly, I want to clarify that cocoa butter and cocoa powder both come from the cocoa bean. And upon registration for this class, you were offered a handout that goes through the whole process of how do we make chocolate in the first place, everything, all the processes from the bean down to essentially our cocoa butter and cocoa powder. I'm not going to review that right now, but you do have that as a resource if you're interested. Okay, back to the cocoa butter. Cocoa butter is essentially fat. It's all fat. And I'm also guessing that over the last years or so, you've seen things in the media, and there's been a lot of just back and forth about whether fat is good for you or not. At one point, fat was really bad for you. At another point, it was great for you. And then there's somewhere in between where maybe it's good for you. So just note that we do have a fat here as one of our ingredients. I also want to ask you, what do you notice about the consistency of the cocoa butter? In other words, is it liquid or is it solid? This is kind of an important thing to note because while we could go through a whole list of our unhealthy fats and our healthy fats, a much easier way to describe it is to say, is that fat solid at room temperature or is it liquid? What that essentially tells us is that when a fat is solid at room temperature, it means it's a saturated fat. And saturated fats are the ones that tend to not be as good for our heart health. So as you can see, one of our ingredients happens to be a saturated fat, the cocoa butter. Now, at the risk of making things too confusing, I want to point out, because this will become important down the road, is that while this is mostly saturated fat, there are quite a few different types of fat all wrapped up into this chunk. And some of them are actually heart-healthy monounsaturated fats. But for the most part, because it's solid, it is a saturated fat. This is going to be relevant when we get into the making of chocolate, because it's important to know that we do have a lot of different kinds of fat within this little chunk. All right, that brings us to the cocoa powder. So the cocoa powder is essentially the non-fat portion of the cocoa bean. And within this, we also have quite a few nutrients. Those nutrients, for example, include magnesium. We get some calcium. We actually get some iron out of this. But most importantly, what we get from the cocoa powder is a compound called polyphenols. They're little ring-shaped structures that if we could zoom in and look at them at a molecular level, that's what we'd see, a bunch of rings bound together. What might be a more applicable or memorable term is that those polyphenols in the body act as antioxidants. So you'll probably hear me use the word polyphenols a lot, but recognize we're talking about their health benefit because they are antioxidants. It also happens that the taste of those polyphenols is quite bitter. Try it sometime. Go to your pantry and see if you have any 100% pure cocoa powder and taste it. You'll find that it's bitter. Because it's bitter, it's the reason that we add the fat and sugar to make chocolate. They are far more palatable and pleasing on the tongue than the bitterness of the polyphenols. Okay, so quick review. 3 base ingredients go into chocolate: sugar, a fat, and the cocoa powder. Of these 3, really the only one that's imparting any health benefits is right here, the cocoa powder. Now, when we take these 3 ingredients and we turn them into chocolate, we get 3 different kinds of chocolate. We have dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and white chocolate. I'm going to start with white chocolate because, well, in all reality, the name is a little bit deceiving. And I say that because white chocolate has cocoa butter, it has sugar, and it has some flavoring, but what it doesn't have is any cocoa powder. So in essence, it doesn't really have that 3rd ingredient that's providing us with health benefits. What I hope you're taking from this is that we can take white chocolate and kind of set it aside and recognize it really isn't a heart-healthy treat by any means. The next type of chocolate, milk chocolate. Okay, I'll just throw an example out here, good old Hershey's bar. I'm sure you're familiar with this. You've tried it at some point in your life. Milk chocolate, same 3 base ingredients plus milk, okay? Then we have our dark chocolate. So dark chocolate really consists of just these 3 base ingredients. And primarily the difference is what is the ratio of fat to sugar to cocoa powder. Now, most bars of chocolate will give you a little bit of a hint at this. So here's what you want to look for when you're choosing your chocolate. I'll start with the Hershey's, and at the risk of, well, don't tell Hershey's I said this, but it's a lower quality chocolate. You'll notice on the label, it doesn't even say what the % of cocoa is. Typically, milk chocolate will range anywhere from 10 to about 45% cocoa. That's by weight. This one, we could probably guess is closer to that, maybe 10 to 20% of cocoa powder. What you should be hearing from that is that it doesn't have a lot of the cocoa compound that's providing us with much health benefit. Conversely, let's have a look at some dark chocolates. This is just two different brands, and you can see right here that it says 75% dark chocolate. What that's telling you is that we get it's a pretty high content of the cocoa powder, whereas this one is running 55%. Both of these bars of chocolate are going to be a lot more bitter than the Hershey's bar. So what I'm going to start off by suggesting is that if you're used to the milk chocolate, and we already know most Americans, that is their preferred chocolate, I'm going to say work your way up and start with a dark chocolate that's closer to this 55%, because they can be upwards of 80% cocoa powder. Those bars you can expect will be much more bitter on the palate, but they are also going to be a lot richer in those healthy polyphenols. Okay, so now you can recognize how to choose your chocolate bars. I want to give you just a perspective. We keep talking about polyphenols, but what's really the difference between this bar that has 75% or the bar that has 55%, or even the milk chocolate bar? So first of all, this information I'm about to share with you is from one study, and you need to know that cocoa powder is going to really vary in how many polyphenols it contains, and that variability is based on the region that it comes from. It varies based on growing conditions. So the numbers I'm about to share with you, they're not absolute. They will vary. What I'm hoping to present to you is just some perspective so that you can get an idea of how different that polyphenol concentration is when we go from the pure powder to dark to milk chocolate. So let's start with the cocoa powder. And again, this was just one study, but a 3-ounce portion had 3,700 milligrams of polyphenols in it, in 3 ounces, okay? Then the dark chocolate, same 3 ounces, dropped down to 579 milligrams. This is clearly a very big difference in the amount of polyphenols that you get from the dark chocolate relative to the cocoa powder. What would you guess it's going to be for the milk chocolate? Anyone want to throw a guess in the chat box? How many milligrams would you say? You can kind of see the comparison here. All right, I'm going to reveal the answer. So maybe you've got a guess in your head. The milk chocolate showed up at a mere 160 milligrams of polyphenols for that 3 ounces. Pretty big difference again between the dark and the milk and the pure cocoa powder. Granted, most of us are not likely to dip into the cocoa powder and have a bite of that. Again, it's bitter. It doesn't taste great. There's a reason that we choose the chocolate. Okay, so now you know that polyphenols are really that health kick that we're getting from the cocoa bean, specifically the cocoa powder. But what exactly are the actions of polyphenols in the body? How do those antioxidants benefit our heart? Well, what most studies are finding is that the greatest impact of those polyphenols is their ability to lower blood pressure. So why does this matter? Of course, everybody knows, yeah, I want lower blood pressure. Maybe I can get off my meds. I'm not saying you can eat chocolate and get off any blood pressure lowering medications, but it may help reduce it a little bit. And that is important because high blood pressure is a strong risk factor for heart failure. So, of course, it's logical that anything we can do to help lower our blood pressure is a step in the right direction. We also have seen some studies that show a little bit of evidence that those antioxidants can help reduce the oxidation of LDL cholesterol. I bet that term is familiar to you. LDL cholesterol is what you may also recognize as the bad cholesterol. And as it becomes oxidized, it has that capacity to clog our arteries and to form plaque. Definitely not what we're looking for in terms of heart health. Now, admittedly, those were some more short-term studies. So for the most part, recognize that that ability to lower your blood pressure is probably the greatest benefit that you'll get from eating dark chocolate. Okay, now you should also recognize that dark chocolate is the better choice of all of our chocolates. However, what I'm about to tell you, I hope this isn't going to disappoint you, more is not necessarily better. What we find is that there's what we call a J-shaped association relative to the amount of chocolate we eat compared to the health benefit. And so at a certain portion, we receive those heart health benefits, but if we eat more, not only do we not get the benefits, but it can also be a little bit more harmful to our health. So what is that sweet spot for portioning, so to speak? What the studies are also showing is that that sweet spot, in other words, the appropriate portion for chocolate is at about 1 ounce every other day or so. In a weekly picture, what you're looking at is 3 to 5 ounces, but it does need to be spread out. That 3 to 5 ounces, and just to give you a visual, this is 3.2 ounces. If you were to sit down and eat this entire chocolate bar at once, that doesn't necessarily give you your weekly dose of health benefits. What does an ounce of chocolate look like? All right, here's where you really get to challenge yourself. 1 ounce of chocolate is right here. To give you a visual, think about how that compares to some dental floss. They're just about the same size, but not necessarily the same this way. So make sure you're kind of comparing same dimensions of your chocolate. Okay, you think you can remember that? This is a good tool to have. There's my ounce of chocolate. Plus it might help remind you to floss, which is also good for you. Okay, that is for most folks. I also want to make a little bit of a disclaimer that 3 to 5 ounces a week will be reduced just a little bit if you are living with diabetes. The studies for those who are living with diabetes, the portion that provided the greatest heart benefits was about 2 ounces a week, again, spread out. And 2 ounces a week, keep in mind that when you're consuming that chocolate, you count that as part of your carbs for your meal and incorporate it, but don't add on to additional carbs that you're choosing from healthier choices in your meals. All right, what you may also recognize is that because we know that of the 3 base ingredients in chocolate, that fat and sugar are 2 of them, recognize that those are energy dense foods. In other words, there's a lot of calories there. So that's where that J-shaped curve comes in, is that if you eat more than roughly that 1 ounce portion at a time or 3 to 5 ounces over the week, what can happen? Weight gain. And weight gain is typically not recommended for heart health. So focus on that 1 ounce portion at a time. I also have to be honest that while we can enjoy the benefits of these polyphenols in our chocolate, recognize there are other food sources that are really great for polyphenols or antioxidants, namely fruit and nuts. Hence the reason that our dark chocolate bark, we're going to throw in some nuts and dried fruit. That way we can really boost up the heart health benefits of it. Tonight we're going to be using pistachios and dark cherries, but you don't have to use that. You can use what's available. All right, now you may also recognize that the title of this presentation was chocolate, good for the heart and soul. Well, we think we've defined why it's good for the heart. It's the polyphenols in appropriate portions. So how is this good for the soul? Let's be honest. Chocolate tastes good. And when we enjoy it mindfully. Really taste that chocolate. And I'd be willing to bet that's going to put a smile on your face. And a smile is good for the soul. All right, with that, I am going to pause. And if there are questions, now is a great time to ask them. And that is also my own mental cue to turn on the stove so that we can get this ready to make chocolate. So I'll open the floor to anyone who may have questions.
Nicole, we have one question in the chat about where someone can buy cocoa butter.
Where, there's quite a few. Good question. So cocoa butter. I hate to promote one company. I happen to purchase mine from a place called Mountain Rose Herbs, but you can look online. I'm sure you can even find it on Amazon. Some of the natural grocers in the area may actually carry it. If you're interested, I can, well, no, I'm not going to show the container. I told you just a couple of ideas of where you can buy it. What I may wish to clarify is that as we dive into the making of the chocolate, we're doing level 1 chocolate making here. You can certainly, as you become more skilled, start making chocolate using some of the raw ingredients. But for the sake of getting started, we're going to use chocolate that's already been made by somebody else.
Also, I know a lot of skincare products have cocoa butter, or is there a difference between just cocoa butter and food grade cocoa butter?
They should be the same, though I would look at the ingredients when you decide to purchase it, because it is possible that some of them could have additives in it that would not make them food grade. I would say read the fine print when you find the product you want to buy. The container should literally say cocoa butter with nothing else in it. But you're absolutely right, it is used in skincare products as well.
Thank you.
I'll be honest, that's why I purchased this cocoa butter in the first place, was for skincare products. So it works there as well. Any other questions? Okay, then here's your quick challenge to see what you've retained. Throw this in the chat box. What do you remember about the 3 base ingredients of chocolate? See who can type them in there the fastest.
I don't know how to chat box.
Okay, then you can just say it out loud. That works too.
Then everybody else will. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, perhaps you're just saying it in your head, but I hope the answer was sugar, cocoa butter, which is a fat, and the cocoa powder. Excellent. All right, here's another opportunity just to test your memory. What is the appropriate weekly portion of dark chocolate? Did we get some answers in the chat box?
Nicole, you can't see the chat box, can you?
No, I can't. I'm
We
blind
have, like,
over here.
They're good. 3 ounces, 2 to 5 ounces, 3 to 5 ounces, enough to keep happy.
And that's where your mindful eating comes in. If you enjoy that portion slowly and taste it, I bet you'll be satisfied. All right, excellent. Well, last chance for questions, and then we're going to move on to the demonstration on how to make chocolate. It's not last chance. Of course, if something else comes up and you think about it in the next 10 minutes, please ask then. All right, Taya, if I could get your help just to lower this. So one of the things that I will start with, and then we just wanted to just hold onto the phone. So tip it down this way so we can see. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we need to get started here. So in other words, what's going to be your equipment? Now, ideally, if you have a double boiler, that works great. I thought I had one and I don't. So I'm going to go with the alternative method. The alternative method is that you need a pot and you're going to want to put some water in there. Then you need a metal bowl. There's a couple things you want to look for here that are going to be key. Is that metal bowl needs to be able to set in the pot with as tight of a fit as possible. The reason for this is we don't want to create a gap where steam can come out. So in order to prevent that, you're looking for as tight of a gap as possible. I also filled up the water so that the bottom of this bowl would just barely sit into it. Not so much water that it's going to cause the bowl to float, but still allow it to sit relatively flush. Now, I want to share something just real quick, because I got to say that in a lot of the reading that I did and preparing for this, most recipes that I found said that you didn't want your bowl to sit in the water. However, the one resource that I found to be really valuable, and this came from the Advanced Professional Pastry Chef, said, and it makes sense, that you're almost better off by making sure that bowl can sit in the water a little bit, because if there's a gap between the water and the bowl, that means we're going to create steam. And steam has a higher temperature than our water will. And we really want to be cautious about the temperature getting too hot, because that will affect, well, one, you could scorch your chocolate and then it's going to taste horrible. But the other thing that can happen is it will negatively impact what we call the tempering of the chocolate. Another way to describe that is when we melt it, we want to make sure that we're melting it low and slow, so that those different fats, remember we talked about this, that there's actually a lot of different fats in this cocoa butter, we want them to melt consistently, because believe it or not, we're going to have some crystal formation. I'll get to that in a little bit, but just know that low and slow is your approach for this chocolate. Okay, so like I said, we've got a fairly tight-fitting bowl. I have the stove turned on to a low to medium low setting. You don't want to rush it. We're really looking for a water temperature that will get to about 140 degrees or slightly less. It should be below boiling. All right, so you know you need this for equipment. Some of the other things that you're going to look for, ideally you have a digital thermometer. This is going to be the quickest and the easiest to use. If you don't have it, that's perfectly fine too. A candy thermometer would work, or even just a bimetallic. The other thing you're going to want to have ready is a rubber spatula. You can also use a wooden spoon. What I'm going to caution against using is a metal spoon, because the metal spoon has a greater likelihood, it conducts heat better, and we don't want to be adding more heat when we're doing the chocolate. You'll also want a sheet pan, and the sheet pan is going to need a parchment liner on it. Next, don't forget your pot holders, and you'll also want a clean towel available. And the purpose of this is we're going to use it to wipe off the bottom of the bowl to make sure it's dry, so that we don't drip water into our chocolate bar. As for our ingredients, now again, this particular recipe is using dried cherries and pistachio nuts, but it's entirely up to you what you use. If you happen to have peanuts and raisins at home, use that. It's a great way to start. Peanuts and raisins are a lot cheaper than dried cherries and pistachios. So as you're kind of getting the feel for this, maybe you're better off using a cheaper product. I also have some orange zest. You don't necessarily have to put this in the chocolate bark, but I'll tell you that citrusy flavor adds a lot to it. So I highly recommend it. And then last but not least, we have our chocolate chunks. You can purchase your dark chocolate in a bar form and break it up yourself. This made the prep work a heck of a lot easier because they're all going to be relatively uniform in size. And this is an important feature to make sure that that chocolate melts evenly. And you can see that this one happens to be a 72% dark chocolate chunks. All right, so I'm gonna test the temperature of our water just real quick so I have a feel for where we're at. I don't know, hopefully you can see this all right. There's a few bubbles just starting to form. Okay, so our temperature right now is at you might be getting a glare, but it's at 139. So I may turn this down just a wee bit, just to ensure that it doesn't start to go over. And we'll talk just briefly about what our strategy is here. We are going to use a technique called seeding. And what that means is that we're gonna introduce about 2/3 of our chocolate into the bowl to get started, not all of it. And this is important for helping to maintain the structure of our chocolate. Ideally, once we put in about 2/3 of this chocolate, we are going to let it sit there and stir it just a little bit. We don't want the temperature of the chocolate to go above 115, even 120 would be okay, but that's kind of the range that we're looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started with this. From this point, we can expect that the melting is gonna take about 9 minutes. And again, I wanna make sure that this bowl tries to stay as flush as it can with the pot, because if that moisture escapes, even though it's as minimal as it really appears, that moisture, when it lands in the chocolate, can cause it to what we call seize. And that seizing results in essentially a grainy chocolate. It's not something that you have to throw away. It's not dangerous, but it's grainy. And most of us prefer that nice, smooth, meltable characteristic of chocolate. All right, so roughly 2/3 there. And we will want to start stirring it right away. Oh, see how easy it is for the bowl to move around on you? So that will happen. And make sure that with the spatula, you're scraping the sides, because we don't want any one part to sit too long where it could potentially burn. The purpose of this initial melting, I mean, outside of being able to make the bark, but more this tempering or making sure that we have a low, slow melting point, is that we actually have a lot of those different fats that are in the chocolate that structurally they're all a little bit different, which makes them melt all at different temperatures. And as they melt and start to reform, they create essentially a crystal. And those crystals play a role in the texture of the chocolate when it's a finished product. So what is considered a good quality chocolate is one that is tempered correctly so that it has a glossy appearance, and it also has a good snap. So when you break it, it snaps. And that's all a result of ideal crystal formation. Now you want to stir it consistently, not too hard. I mean, you wouldn't want to put even a rubber whisk in here. We don't want to introduce air bubbles, but we do want to make sure that all those fats, as they melt, have a chance to disperse and spread out evenly. And this is why a double broiler works a lot better, because it doesn't move around on you. You can also use a microwave method. So if this looks a little bit intimidating, kind of the strategy for the microwave, obviously you don't use a metal bowl, you'd use a microwave safe bowl. You'd power down to about 50%, and then you'll heat it in 30-second intervals. And I would still go with this seeding method. Okay. So I'm just gonna quickly check our temperature. There are still a few more chunks in here, as you can see, and that is okay. The quick reminder, I'm looking for about 115. And make sure you don't touch the bottom of the bowl. Okay, so we're at 95. We can maybe, this part, it's not as critical if you don't hit 115. That's just kind of the max that you want to reach. We are right about at that point where most of the chocolate is melted. So what I'm going to do is turn off my heat. I'm going to pull the chocolate. You may or may not need the heating pad. I will leave that at your discretion. And I'm going to seed in the remaining chocolate. So again, we've got different shaped crystals from the hard chocolate right now. They are going to help create this ideal crystal formation as we melt it back in here. And it's possible I may need to put it back on the water bath just temporarily. We'll see how this, there's a lot of factors going on here. Everything, just by putting my bowl onto granite countertops, that's going to take away some of the heat. So it may be necessary to warm it up again. And don't worry about this too much. If you don't make the perfect bar of chocolate or bark, it's not the end of the world. I guarantee you that it will still get eaten and enjoyed. It may not win the Chocolate of the Year award, but it's going to taste great. And I'm going to guess that we're going to need to put this back on just temporarily. So I have one challenge for you all, and you don't have to do it right now, but next time, after the end of this show, or maybe even tomorrow, have a look at any dark chocolate bars that may be hanging out in your pantry or your cupboards right now. And this is an opportunity to kind of see what is the percentage of dark chocolate that you're currently used to. Your next step to make it just a little bit healthier is that movement up in cocoa percentage. Okay. So you know how M&M's has the melts in your mouth, not in your hand? Guess why they came up with that slogan? The reason for that is that cocoa butter tends to melt right at about 90 degrees. And so 90 degrees, your hand isn't going to accomplish that temperature. So it won't melt in your hand, but the minute you put it in your mouth, that fat in the cocoa butter in the chocolate will be ready to melt. And that's what creates that nice creamy texture that we find in chocolate. we're getting closer. And just to note, we're only using the heat from the water that was there. I did not turn my stove back on. Okay, so we're at 92, 93, so it's getting a little warm. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it off. I might have just ruined my perfect crystal formation, but I guarantee my kids will still eat it. Okay. Almost completely melted. And then we'll be ready to add in half of the nuts and half of the dried fruit. And I do want to wait until most of those bits of chocolate are melted, because as soon as I add some more mass from the cherries and the nuts, we'll change the temperature a little bit. And I just realized one thing that I failed to mention is we started with 24 ounces of chocolate. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's a lot. Maybe I'll just do a half batch. What I'm going to suggest is that you don't start with less than 24 ounces of chocolate, because having that initial mass to get started will help with that slow melting. If you have too little chocolate in there, you run the risk of the heat shooting up way beyond that desirable temperature. So even if it seems like a lot and you're concerned about having that much chocolate bark in the house, then I'm going to suggest be generous with your friends and give half of it away. All right, we're there. So I've got the pistachios, and as you can see, some of them are chopped. This is not an even chopping job, but that's okay. It really doesn't matter. You don't have to chop it at all if you don't want to. I'm going to introduce half of those. And then half of the dried cherries. We'll stir that in. And I'm saving the zest for last, only because there's a lot of essential oils in the zest, and that's what imparts not only the smell, but also the flavor. But they're kind of sensitive to heat. They'll start to evaporate. So we want to get that in at the very last minute. Get it fully incorporated. The tray over. And then our next step is simply to try not to drop it all off the edge there. Spread it onto our prepared sheet pan. At this angle, it's a little awkward. This is when you wish you had 3 arms. All right, that'll do for now. I bet I have a 9-year-old who's going to be vying to lick the bowl and the spatula.
I'll do
it. And then from here, we're just going to spread it out so that it's about a 1/4 inch thick. And it doesn't have to be perfect. If it's not a 1/4 inch or it's not a 1/4 inch all the way across, it's a pretty forgiving recipe to start with. Oh, I hear the chocolate monster already dipping into the bowl over here. Okay, and then I'm going to take the remaining pistachios, sprinkle them evenly. This was about 3/4 of a cup. You should have access to the recipe, but just so you know, about 3/4 of a cup of the nuts, about 3/4 of a cup of the dried fruit, and about a teaspoon of the zest. Voila. And we are just about done with the bark. This is also going to be a test of your patience. So we'll move the camera over. This is going to be a little bit of a test of your patience because unfortunately, this is going to take just a little bit of time to set up. So anticipate that when you make it, it may not fully firm up for quite a few hours. It may even take overnight. Kind of depends on how you did with the melting of your chocolate. Because again, you're looking for that reformation of those fats creating crystals. So we have this as our final product, though I will show you. This is one that I made last night with peanuts and raisins because it was a little bit cheaper. And you can also see that we had evidence along the edges of some little munchkins dipping into the product. So testament that, well, who doesn't like chocolate? But proof that when it's in the house, it'll stay around and be enjoyed. From this point, what I'm going to suggest is that you wrap it up in plastic, and with that plastic, then put it in a dark spot. It doesn't necessarily need to go in the fridge. In fact, I would recommend it doesn't go in the fridge because that can actually cause what's called a bit of a bloom. And bloom is, there's two different kinds of bloom. One where the fat can come to the surface and it creates a little bit of a white cast. So not a problem. It doesn't look glossy and beautiful. So simply wrap it up in some plastic. Another thing that you may note, and I'll show you a demonstration, that you can also start to see these little swirly things. If that happens, it's not a big deal. This is what we call sugar bloom. And it's really just the sugar that's in the chocolate that is capturing moisture in the air and creates those external crystals. Again, not a big deal. It just doesn't look quite as pretty. So make sure you wrap it tightly in plastic. All right. That concludes the presentation. So I'm open for any questions that you may have. We'll go from there.
Nicole, from the chat, is there an advantage of this method over the microwave method?
Well, I would say knowing how microwaves heat, so you've got different waves coming in, it can be a little bit inconsistent. What could potentially happen in the microwave is that where those waves are coming in, you could tend to get hot spots in your chocolate. And in essence, it's not going to allow the fats to all melt evenly. So it will be really important if you opt to try the microwave method that you're really looking for that low power and stopping it every 30 seconds and making sure that you stir it really well so that you can disperse that heat.
And does the chocolate bark have to sit without a cover overnight?
I have been letting it sit without a cover just because I don't want it when it's soft to suddenly stick to the plastic. But I would say as soon as it's hard, then cover it up with some plastic. And you know, if you made this earlier on in the day, then you wouldn't have to worry about that because you could check it periodically. I was not willing to get up at 3 in the morning to see if my chocolate was hard.
And any tips on cutting it up or presentation?
You know what, that is entirely up to you. A lot of people, kind of as the name implies, bark, they like that rough look to it. But if you're more of a, if you like that perfectionist look, certainly by the time this gets, by the time it solidifies, it'll be very easy to cut. what I would suggest is that you take a knife and kind of score it in the lines that you want, and then go through and chop it. And that'll help you get a nice clean cut.
Before we close, I want to let everyone know, I want to thank people for coming, but we're having 3 more programs with Nicole. 2 weeks from today, on the 24th, she's going to talk about giving your energy to movement. And then in March, we have a program on the Mediterranean diet. And let's see, that is, oh, I don't have it on this calendar. And then we're gonna travel the world from culture to cuisine, also in March. So check your local library for those dates and times. Well, it's always from 6 to 7, but thank you, Nicole.
My pleasure. I appreciate you all taking an hour out of your day to be a part of this presentation. I'm a firm believer in lifelong learning, even if it is learning about chocolate.
Yes, thank you everyone, and thank you Nicole. And also, if you go to your local libraries, we often either will have books on using chocolate, making chocolate, like cookbooks and such, or a lot of us are part of consortiums or we can share. So if we don't have a book, you can put a hold on it if you want to do some more reading or watching about chocolate.
Sorry, I joined the presentation late. I thought it was at 7 o'clock.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you anyway.
We will have this recorded, and so I will probably be posting this on my library's website, Ignacio Library, and I wouldn't be surprised if Darcy made it available for Pine River and Durango and Southwest, etc. So be on the watch for the video file so you can watch it.
Okay. And you're always welcome to reach out if you have questions. Our website is laplataextension.org, or my email is nicole.clark@colostate.edu.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Nicole, one more quick
My
question.
pleasure.
Do you know of a good history of chocolate?
A good history of chocolate. Well, it has, no, I can't say I know a ton of the history, but there is, if you send me an email, I believe it's the University of Wisconsin Extension, they have a great informational sheet on chocolate that'll dip into a little more of the history. So I'd be happy to share that with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic.
My
All right.
pleasure.
Well,
Okay.
if no one has any more questions, feel free to log off. Like I said, we'll have this video posted as soon as we can. Trisha also just posted Nicole's email in the chat if anyone needs it, as well as the supporting documents. Otherwise, feel free to email Darcy at Pine River Library and she can get those to you as well. So thank you again, everyone, for attending tonight. We greatly appreciate it, and look out for those future programs coming in March.
Thank you. Hope to see you
February
all in another presentation.